A woman walks into a wedding, not knowing her wedding was just a cruel prank, and minutes later, the Mafia boss Groom was on his knees begging. She came to expose a dangerous crime family, but instead they dragged her down the aisle, laughing as they tried to marry her off as a warning. And the man waiting at the altar? He wasn't part of the prank. The moment he realizes he's been used, everything explodes. Guards pull guns, guests scream, and the cold, feared Mafia boss suddenly drops to his knees in front of her, begging her to trust him, because now the whole crime family wants them both dead. But there's something he's not telling her, a secret about why his own family betrayed him and why saving her might destroy them both. As they run for their lives, sharing danger, blame, and a spark they never expected, she starts to wonder, is he trying to protect her or pull her deeper into a world she can never escape? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn breeze whispered through the Romano estate's marble columns as Zara Hale pressed herself against the cool service corridor wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her trembling fingers clutched her phone, its screen dimmed to avoid detection as she typed quick notes about the opulent surroundings. Security checkpoint near West Entrance. 3 guards rotating shifts, she muttered under her breath, documenting everything she observed. The wedding preparations buzzed around her, servers rushing past with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres, none sparing her a second glance in her borrowed catering uniform. Zara tugged at the tight collar of her white button-down shirt, sweat beading at her temples despite the cool October air. 6 months of investigating the Romano family's suspicious society weddings had led her here, to what she hoped would be the smoking gun that proved their money laundering operation. The sound of string instruments drifted through the ornate wooden doors ahead, where hundreds of Italy's elite had gathered for yet another lavish Romano ceremony. Zara inched closer, her sensible shoes silent against the polished floor. Just a few photos, a glimpse of the paperwork, anything to verify her suspicions. Strong hands suddenly gripped her arms from behind. "Got her," a gruff voice announced. Before Zara could cry out, 2 burly security guards yanked her away from her hiding spot. "Wait! I can explain," she started, but they ignored her protests, dragging her through a different set of doors. The bright afternoon sun momentarily blinded her as they emerged into the estate's grand courtyard. Laughter erupted around her as the guards marched her straight down the center aisle. Zara blinked rapidly, her vision clearing to reveal rows upon rows of seated guests. Politicians, business moguls, and known criminal figures, all turning to stare at her with cruel amusement. Camera flashes exploded like strobe lights as she stumbled forward. The white rose petals scattered across the runner crunched beneath her feet, and that's when the horrifying reality began to sink in. This wasn't just any aisle. It was the wedding aisle. "Proceed," commanded a cold voice from the front row. Don Salvatore Romano sat regally in his reserved seat, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, his dark eyes fixed on Zara with calculating satisfaction. At the altar, an elderly priest cleared his throat and began reciting rapid-fire Latin prayers. Zara's mind spun as she processed the elaborate flower archway, the rings waiting on a velvet cushion, and finally the man standing before her. Luca Romano towered over her in a perfectly tailored black suit, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. His sharp jawline could have been carved from marble, and a thin scar traced the edge of his left cheekbone, a reminder of his violent profession. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, steel gray and wide, with genuine shock as they met hers. "I don't know you," he mouthed silently, his brows drawn together in confusion. The slight shake of his head confirmed what she'd already guessed. This forced ceremony was as much a surprise to him as it was to her. Zara tried to step backward, but the guard's grip only tightened. "This is insane," she whispered hoarsely. "You can't just—" "The rings," the priest announced, gesturing impatiently. More laughter rippled through the crowd as Zara struggled. She could feel Don Salvatore's satisfied smirk burning into her back, could hear the whispered mockery from the assembled guests. Her cheeks flamed with humiliation as another camera flash went off. "Please," she pleaded quietly to Luca, searching his stoic face for any sign of mercy. "This isn't right." Something flickered in his steel-gray eyes, a brief flash of what might have been sympathy, quickly masked by practiced indifference. His massive hands remained clasped formally in front of him, the knuckles scarred from years of violence that Zara had documented in her investigation. The guards forced her another step closer to the altar. The priest continued his rapid chanting, clearly determined to proceed regardless of the unwilling participants. Zara's borrowed flats slipped on the scattered rose petals as she tried to plant her feet. She could see the headlines now. Investigative reporter vanishes after failed Romano expose. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just about a forced marriage. This was about silencing her permanently, burying her investigation along with any chance of escape. The autumn breeze picked up, scattering more petals across the pristine runner. The string quartet continued their elegant melody, lending an air of legitimacy to what was essentially a kidnapping in broad daylight. The guests' designer clothes and expensive jewelry sparkled in the sunshine, as if this were truly just another society wedding rather than a power play by one of Italy's most dangerous families. Zara's phone weighed heavily in her pocket, filled with evidence that could bring down the Romano Empire if she ever got the chance to publish it. She glanced desperately toward the estate's gates, but armed guards stood at attention every few feet along the perimeter walls. There would be no running from this. The priest paused for breath, and in that moment of relative quiet, Zara heard Don Salvatore's smooth voice carry from the front row. "Welcome to the family, Ms. Hale." A chill ran down her spine. He knew exactly who she was. This wasn't random. This was calculated revenge for her investigation, wrapped in the pretty package of a forced marriage to his heir. Luca's jaw tightened at his father's words, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. His hands clenched briefly at his sides before resuming their formal pose. Whatever game the Don was playing, his son clearly hadn't been consulted. "The rings!" the priest repeated more firmly, gesturing to a nervous-looking altar boy who stepped forward with the velvet cushion. The guards pushed Zara closer still until she stood directly before Luca. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his breathing remained perfectly controlled despite the tension radiating from his powerful frame. A woman in the front row dabbed at fake tears with a lace handkerchief, while others continued snapping photos of Zara's humiliation. The string quartet launched into the traditional wedding march, lending a surreal soundtrack to her nightmare. "This is assault," Zara hissed under her breath, though she knew it was futile. The Romano family operated above the law, their influence extending into every corner of power in northern Italy. There would be no help from the authorities, not when half of them were seated in the audience. The autumn sun beat down on her neck as she stood trapped between the guards, facing a man who could probably kill her with his bare hands. Luca Romano's reputation as his father's enforcer was well documented in her research. Countless acts of violence carried out with cold efficiency. Yet there was something in the way he looked at her now, something almost apologetic beneath his hardened exterior. His lips parted slightly as if he might speak, but no words came. They were both pawns in Don Salvatore's game, forced into position by hands neither could see. The priest began another round of prayers, his voice rising above the whispers and camera clicks. Zara felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, judging her borrowed catering uniform and messy ponytail against the backdrop of designer gowns and custom suits. She lifted her chin defiantly, refusing to show how deeply their mockery cut. The guard's fingers dug into her arms, leaving bruises she knew would bloom purple by morning. Assuming she lived that long, every survival instinct screamed at her to fight, to run, to do something besides stand here while her life was stolen from her one Latin phrase at a time. But Luca's steady gaze held her in place more effectively than any physical restraint. There was a story in those steel-gray eyes, a complexity she hadn't expected from someone she'd dismissed as merely a violent enforcer. He was as much a prisoner of this moment as she was, though his chains were forged from duty and family rather than brute force. "Stop! I'm a journalist!" Zara's voice cracked as she tried to project over the string quartet. "This is illegal. I'm here investigating." Her protest dissolved into the sea of mocking laughter that rippled through the crowd. Designer-clad women tittered behind manicured hands while their husbands, men she recognized from her investigation as some of Italy's most dangerous criminals, smirked openly at her distress. "How charming," a woman in the front row drawled. "She thinks she can still stop this." The priest continued droning in Latin, acting as if he hadn't heard her outburst. Zara's chest tightened as panic clawed at her throat. The guard's grip hadn't loosened, and the crowd's amusement only seemed to grow with each attempt she made to expose the truth. But then Luca moved, breaking the careful choreography of the ceremony. He stepped forward with his hands raised, palms out in a gesture of surrender that seemed wildly out of place on a man of his reputation. The laughter faltered as he dropped to one knee before her, his expression grave. "Trust me," he whispered. his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Just for the next 5 minutes, it's the only way we both get out alive." Zara stared down at him, struck by the urgency in his steel-gray eyes. This was the Romano family's infamous enforcer, a man whose name appeared in connection with dozens of unsolved murders in her research files. Yet something in his face spoke of desperation rather than threat. In the front row, Don Salvatore's amused expression hardened into something darker. He made a sharp gesture, and suddenly the guards were moving, their weapons appearing as if conjured from thin air. The wedding guests gasped, their entertainment turning to alarm as the facade of civility crumbled. Luca moved with stunning speed. One moment he was kneeling, the next he had yanked Zara behind his broad shoulders, using his body as a shield as the armed men advanced. "The wedding was never real," he murmured, backing them slowly toward a side door. "It's theater, meant to scare you into dropping whatever story you're chasing, but something's wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to go." A guard lunged for Zara's arm. Luca's fist connected with the man's jaw in a brutal arc that sent him sprawling across the white runner. The string quartet abandoned their instruments, fleeing as chaos erupted. Wedding guests scattered, their screams adding to the cacophony as more guards converged. "Move," Luca commanded, shoving Zara through the service entrance. They burst into a narrow corridor lined with oil paintings and antique sconces. Their footsteps echoed on marble as they ran, the sounds of pursuit close behind. "Left!" Luca grabbed her elbow, steering her through a maze of hallways. "Through the kitchen, there's a service exit." They crashed through swinging doors into a gleaming industrial kitchen. Startled staff dropped plates and pans, adding to the chaos as Luca and Zara wove between steel counters. A bullet pinged off a copper pot hanging overhead, sending kitchen workers diving for cover. "Cars out back!" Luca panted, shouldering open a heavy door. Sunlight hit them like a physical force as they emerged into a courtyard. A sleek black SUV sat idling, its engine a low purr of promised escape. Luca practically threw Zara into the passenger seat before vaulting across the hood and sliding behind the wheel. The engine roared as he slammed the accelerator, tires spitting gravel as they fishtailed onto a narrow forest road. "Are you insane?" Zara finally found her voice, gripping the dashboard as Luca took a sharp turn at dangerous speed. "I want nothing to do with you or your psychotic family. Let me out." "They're behind us." Luca's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror as he accelerated through the dense trees. "3 cars, heavily armed. You really want to get out here." "Better than being trapped with a murderer." She grabbed for the door handle, but Luca engaged the child locks with a quick tap of his finger. "I've never killed anyone who didn't deserve it," he said grimly, taking another turn that sent them sliding sideways before the tires found purchase again. "And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and people who definitely want you dead." "Oh, that's comforting!" Zara's voice dripped sarcasm, even as fear knotted her stomach. "The professional killer has standards. Just let me go. I'll disappear. Drop the story, whatever you want." "It's too late for that." Luca's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he threaded between the trees at terrifying speed. "The moment my father arranged that ceremony, we both became liabilities. The Romano syndicate doesn't leave loose ends." The SUV burst from the forest onto a winding mountain road. Behind them, black sedans emerged from the trees like angry wasps, their engines snarling as they gave chase. Luca accelerated again, taking each curve with practiced precision while their pursuers slowly fell behind. "This is insane!" Zara pressed her hands to her temples, trying to think through the adrenaline fog. "An hour ago, I was just gathering evidence about money laundering. How did this become my life?" "Welcome to my world." Luca's laugh held no humor. "Where family reunions end in firefights and wedding ceremonies are just elaborate death threats." The chase continued along the mountain roads, the pursuing, vehicles gradually dropping back as Luca's superior driving skills showed. But Zara could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. This wasn't over. It was barely beginning. "What happens now?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Now we run," Luca replied, his expression grim as he guided the SUV deeper into the Italian countryside. "And we figure out what my father is really trying to hide. Because this level of response means you stumbled onto something bigger than wedding fraud." The autumn sun hung low on the horizon, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow as they fled. Behind them, the Romano estate grew smaller until it vanished completely, taking with it any chance of returning to their normal lives. Whatever Zara had uncovered in her investigation, it had just entangled her fate with that of a man trained from birth to kill without mercy. Yet as she watched Luca's profile, noted the protective way he had shielded her with his own body, she wondered if there might be more to him than the cold-blooded enforcer of her research files. He had chosen to save her rather than obey his father, a decision that had likely signed his own death warrant. The sun bled crimson across the horizon as Luca guided the SUV down a dirt track, branches scraping against the vehicle's sides. After hours of evasive driving through back roads and mountain passes, they finally approached a weathered cabin nestled among towering pines. The structure looked abandoned at first glance, exactly as intended. Zara's legs trembled as she stepped out, her borrowed catering uniform stained with sweat and dust from their escape. The cabin's wooden exterior bore the patina of age, but she noticed the fresh locks and reinforced windows that betrayed its true purpose. "Inside," Luca ordered, scanning the tree line with the hyper-vigilance of a hunted man. "Quickly." The interior surprised her. Beneath its rustic facade lay a militant's haven. Gun cabinets lined one wall, their contents visible through polished glass. A bank of surveillance monitors flickered with feeds from hidden cameras, while medical supplies and emergency gear filled organized shelves. "I'm leaving," Zara announced, turning toward the door. But Luca's broad frame blocked her path, his expression grim. "Step outside that door, and you'll be dead before dawn," he said quietly. "My father's men are combing every road, every building within 50 miles. They're professionals. They'll find you." "Move!" she demanded, trying to push past him. His body remained immovable as stone. "You don't understand what you've walked into," Luca continued. "The Romano Syndicate doesn't leave witnesses. They don't show mercy, and they definitely don't let journalists who've seen inside our operations walk away." Zara pulled out her phone, desperate to contact someone, anyone who could help. The screen showed no service. She opened her email, her cloud, storage, her social media accounts. Each attempt met the same response: account not found. "What did you do?" she whispered, horror dawning as she realized her entire digital life had vanished. "Not me," Luca replied. "The family's tech team. They're erasing every trace of you. Social media, bank accounts, employment records. By morning, Zara Hale won't exist on paper." "This is insane!" She hurled the useless phone across the room. "I was investigating wedding fraud, for God's sake. Money laundering through fake ceremonies, that's all. How is this worth killing over?" "Then why did my father stage that circus today?" Luca's voice held an edge of bitter humor. "Why trap his own son in a forced marriage to a stranger? I was supposed to be marrying Sofia Castellano, daughter of our strongest political ally. Instead, I find myself protecting the very journalist who's been digging into our business." "Protecting me?" Zara laughed harshly. "You're holding me prisoner." "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it out of that church," he snapped. "Whatever you stumbled onto, it scared my father enough to burn his own bridges. The Castellanos will never forgive this insult. He sacrificed a crucial alliance just to get to you." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. The Romano family had erased her existence and alienated powerful allies, all to stop whatever she'd been about to uncover. What had she seen in those financial records that warranted this response? Hours crept by as darkness claimed the forest. Zara paced the cabin's confines like a caged animal, while Luca methodically checked weapons and monitored the surveillance feeds. The tension between them crackled with unspoken accusations. Exhaustion eventually dragged at her limbs. The adrenaline that had sustained her through their escape drained away, leaving bone-deep weariness. Her head throbbed from stress and dehydration. "There's a bedroom through there," Luca said, nodding toward a door. "You should rest while you can." "So you can kill me in my sleep." The words lacked their earlier venom, replaced by simple fatigue. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't wait for you to sleep through it." He settled onto the couch, positioning himself between her and the cabin's entrance. A knife glinted in his hand. Not threatening her, she realized, but guarding against threats from outside. The bedroom was sparse but clean, with blackout curtains and a sturdy bed. Zara sat on its edge, listening to the night sounds filtering through the walls. Crickets chirped their evening chorus, occasionally drowned out by the distant rumble of engines. Search teams combing the darkness for any sign of them. She hadn't asked to be part of this world of violence and shadows. She'd been investigating financial crimes, following paper trails through shell companies and fake wedding venues. How had that led to her being erased from existence, hunted by killers, dependent on the protection of a man who admitted to murder? Through the partially open door, she could see Luca's silhouette. He sat perfectly still, head tilted slightly, as he tracked sounds beyond her hearing range. The knife in his hand caught occasional glints of moonlight through the windows. His posture spoke of someone accustomed to long nights of vigilance, of violence held in check but ready to explode at a moment's notice. The same hands that had shielded her from bullets now cradled a blade with practiced familiarity. The man who had defied his father and powerful allies to protect her was also trained to kill without hesitation. The contradiction twisted in her mind as exhaustion pulled her toward uneasy sleep. A vehicle's engine growled somewhere in the darkness, closer than the others. Luca's shadow shifted slightly, muscles tensing as he tracked the sound. Zara held her breath until the noise faded into the distance. The threat was real. The Romano Syndicate's reach was vast, their resources nearly unlimited. They would not stop hunting until they found her. Found them both. And for tonight at least, her survival depended entirely on the dangerous man standing guard beyond her door. "Try to sleep," Luca's quiet voice carried through the darkness. "Tomorrow we figure out what my father is willing to kill to keep hidden. Tonight we just survive." Zara lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, her mind racing despite her body's exhaustion. The sheets smelled of cedar and gun oil, an oddly fitting combination for this safe house between worlds. Outside, engines continued their distant prowl through the night, while inside, a killer stood watch over her safety. Her last coherent thought before sleep claimed her was that nothing in her journalism career had prepared her for this, for being erased from existence, for depending on a Mafia enforcer's protection, for the realization that she had stumbled onto something far darker than wedding fraud. Whatever truth lay hidden in the Romano family's secrets, it was worth killing for. And now that truth was all she had left. The scent of eggs and coffee pulled Zara from her uneasy sleep. Thin ribbons of dawn light filtered through gaps in the blackout curtains, casting strange shadows across the safe house's worn floorboards. For one disoriented moment, she could almost pretend she was waking up in a quaint bed and breakfast, rather than hiding from killers. The domestic scene in the kitchen shattered that illusion. Luca Romano stood at the ancient stove, his powerful frame incongruous against the mundane task of cooking breakfast. He'd shed his formal wedding jacket, and his white shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing corded forearms marked with old scars. A gun rested within easy reach beside the salt shaker. "You should eat," he said without turning around. "We have a long day ahead." Zara's stomach churned at the thought of food, but the smell made her realize she hadn't eaten since sneaking into the Romano estate yesterday, when she'd still been just a journalist chasing a story, before her entire life had imploded. While Luca focused on plating the eggs, Zara saw her chance. The back door was only 15 feet away, if she moved quietly enough. She made it halfway across the yard before strong arms wrapped around her waist, yanking her behind a storage shed. Luca's hand clamped over her mouth just as a black SUV crawled past on the dirt road, its tinted windows concealing whoever searched inside. "That's the third patrol this morning," Luca whispered against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. "They're systematic. They won't stop until they find you." Zara struggled against his grip until the vehicle disappeared around a bend. When he finally released her, she spun to face him, fists clenched. "I don't need your protection. I can handle myself." "Like you just handled nearly walking into a search team?" His voice remained frustratingly calm. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into." "Then explain it to me. Stop with the vague warnings and tell me why your family is trying to kill me." Luca's expression hardened. "Come inside. You need to see something." Back in the cabin, he pulled out a laptop and opened a series of financial records. "These are the shipping manifests you were investigating through the wedding venues. Look at the patterns." Zara leaned closer, scanning the documents. Heavy furniture shipments every 2 weeks, always to different shell companies, but following the same routes. "Now look at the destination codes." His finger traced a column of numbers. "These aren't furniture shipments, they're human cargo." The realization hit her like ice water. "Trafficking," Luca nodded grimly. "Run by Vincent Caruso, my father's most trusted lieutenant. Your blog posts about the wedding venues came dangerously close to exposing their pipeline. That makes you a direct threat to their empire." "So your father forced us into a sham marriage to what? Shut me up. To control us both. He knows I've been looking for ways to destroy him ever since." Luca's jaw clenched. "Since my brother. This way, he can monitor us, threaten one to control the other. You expect me to believe you want to take down your own family? I've spent years gathering evidence, building a case that could tear down the entire syndicate. but I need someone with your investigative skills to connect the pieces. His eyes met hers. Help me bring them down from the inside. Zara backed away, shaking her head. This is manipulation. You're trying to use me just like your father is. We need to get your evidence. Whatever you found in those financial records could be the key. My laptop's at my apartment, all my research, then that's our next move. Luca was already checking his weapons. But we have to be careful, they'll be watching your place. The drive into the city was tense with unspoken words. Zara directed Luca through side streets to avoid main roads, her heart pounding harder with each familiar landmark. Her apartment building looked unchanged, but the normalcy felt wrong now, like a mask hiding danger. Wait here, Luca ordered, but Zara was already out of the car. This was her home. She needed to see for herself. The door was unlocked. Inside, devastation greeted them. Her furniture lay overturned, papers scattered like fallen leaves. Her laptop was gone, external hard drives smashed. Even her backup flash drives had been found and destroyed. But worse was the message sprayed across her living room wall in dripping red paint. Stop breathing. Lights flicked on in neighboring windows. A car door slammed outside. They're watching the building. Luca grabbed her arm. We need to go, now. They fled down the back stairs as voices echoed in the stairwell above them. Luca's car roared to life the moment they dove inside, tires squealing as they escaped into early morning traffic. Zara's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Everything she'd built, her research, her reputation, her entire life, had been systematically destroyed. Her neighbors would be questioned. Her friends would be watched. There would be no going back to her old life. I can't, her voice cracked. I can't do this. I'm not built for this world. Look at me, Luca commanded softly. When she met his gaze, his eyes were intent but gentle. You're stronger than you think, and right now, we only have two choices. Work together to bring them down or spend our lives running. There's no middle ground anymore. Zara stared out the window at the city sliding past, at all the normal people starting their normal days, completely unaware of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. Her old life was already gone. The only way forward was through. The morning sun caught the gold band still on her finger, a prop from yesterday's forced ceremony that now felt like a lifetime ago. She twisted it absently, the symbol of a union neither of them had chosen, yet somehow found themselves bound by. If I help you, she said finally, I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Luca's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he guided them onto the highway, away from the city and the wreckage of her former life. Deal. But remember, once you know everything, there's no going back. They drove in silence as the city receded behind them, each lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. Zara's world had contracted to this moment, this car, this impossible alliance with a dangerous man she barely knew, yet somehow he had become her only lifeline in a storm that threatened to drown her. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, but failing to touch the shadows that now defined their shared existence. Whatever truth lay ahead, whatever dangers waited, they would face them together. The journalist and the Mafia heir, bound by secrets and survival, racing toward a future neither could predict. The abandoned textile factory loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered brick walls telling stories of forgotten industry. Luca guided the SUV around back, cutting the engine in a loading bay, sheltered from street view. Shadows stretched long across broken concrete as evening settled in. It's not much, Luca said, leading Zara through a heavy steel door. But the Romano family doesn't know about this place. I used it during internal disputes. The vast interior space echoed with their footsteps. Hulking machinery stood dormant under dust covers, while metal catwalks crisscrossed the ceiling high above. Emergency lights cast a dim glow, revealing that someone, Luca, had carved out a living space in one corner. A few cots, weapons cases, medical supplies, and surveillance equipment created a sparse but functional base. We need to talk strategy, Luca said, pulling out a chair for her at a battered metal desk. There's a communications hub in the city center disguised as a shipping company. All Romano operations route through there, including trafficking data. Zara crossed her arms. And how exactly do you plan to get us inside? We go in as what we technically are, newlyweds. His expression remained neutral as her face darkened. The Romano family credentials will get us access to restricted areas. Staff won't question a son showing his new bride the family business. Absolutely not. Zara stood so quickly, her chair scraped concrete. I won't pretend to be happily married to the man who destroyed my life. Your life was destroyed the moment you started digging into those financial records, Luca countered, though his voice held no malice. This is our best shot at finding proof of what they're doing. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not if we want to move freely through Romano territory. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. I don't like this any more than you do, but sometimes survival means playing roles we never wanted. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Zara paced the factory floor, mind racing. The logical part of her knew he was right. They needed access only Romano family members could provide. But the thought of pretending intimacy with him, even for show. She winced as her hand brushed against rough metal, reopening a scrape from their earlier escape. Before she could react, Luca was there with a first aid kit, gesturing for her to sit. Let me see, he said quietly. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound, his calloused fingers careful not to cause additional pain. Zara watched his face as he worked, noting how his brow furrowed in concentration, how he seemed to hold his breath whenever she tensed. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, securing the bandage. About the ceremony, about all of it. You never should have been dragged into this. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she glimpsed something beneath his hardened exterior. Regret, perhaps, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. We should review the hub's layout, he continued, moving away to spread blueprints across the desk. But Zara noticed how he hesitated before each casual touch now, as if afraid of spooking her. They spent hours planning entry points and escape routes, their heads bent together over building schematics. Luca's knowledge of security systems proved extensive, while Zara's investigative experience helped identify likely locations for stored data. As night deepened, the storm drew closer. Lightning illuminated the factory's high windows, casting strange shadows through the machinery. Despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs, Zara couldn't stop watching Luca's movements. The precise way he checked weapons, the unconscious grace in his stride. Even in this dilapidated space, he carried himself like someone who knew exactly who and what he was, which made the moments of gentleness all the more disorienting. You should try to rest, he said eventually, nodding toward one of the cots. Tomorrow will be intense. Zara climbed the metal stairs to the factory's loft level, where Luca had arranged sleeping quarters away from ground floor visibility. She chose the cot farthest from his, though distance felt meaningless in the charged atmosphere between them. Thunder crashed overhead as she lay in the darkness, listening to Luca's measured breathing across the space. The storm matched her turbulent thoughts, about trust, about survival, about the dangerous magnetism she felt toward a man she should hate. More than once, she caught him shifting restlessly, obviously as awake as she was. The air felt heavy with unspoken words, with questions neither dared voice. Every flash of lightning threw his profile into sharp relief, and Zara found herself studying the hard lines of his face, softened slightly in repose. What kind of man was he, really? The brutal enforcer his family had shaped, or the gentle soul who bandaged her wounds? The Mafia heir who'd upheld violence, or the rebel working to tear it all down? Perhaps he was both, as complex and contradictory as the storm raging outside, and perhaps that's what made him so dangerous to her peace of mind. Hours passed in sleepless contemplation. The thunder gradually faded, leaving only the steady drum of rain on the factory's metal roof. Yet still they lay awake, each wondering if this fragile alliance would be their salvation or their destruction. Zara traced the bandage on her hand, remembering the careful way he'd tended to her. Such tenderness from hands that had doubtless caused so much harm. It made no sense. He made no sense. And that uncertainty terrified her almost as much as the Romano family's threats. Another flash of lightning, another glimpse of his face turned toward the ceiling. Their eyes met briefly, before both quickly looked away. That single moment of connection sent electricity through her veins that had nothing to do with the storm. Rain continued falling as midnight came and went. Two people, alone in the vast, empty space of the factory, each fighting private battles with trust and attraction and fear, neither speaking, both acutely aware of the other's presence, of the growing tension that seemed to fill the air between their separate cots. Tomorrow, they would have to play at marriage, at intimacy. Tonight, they lay apart, listening to the storm and wondering if their unlikely partnership would prove to be their redemption or their downfall. Dawn painted the city skyline in shades of gray as Luca guided their borrowed sedan through empty streets. Beside him, Zara fidgeted with the gold band on her left hand, a prop that felt impossibly heavy. Her business attire and carefully styled hair completed the image of a young executive wife, though her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt. "Remember," Luca murmured, adjusting his own disguise, designer glasses and a meticulously trimmed beard that changed the sharp angles of his face. "We're Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, newly transferred from the Chicago office." The Romano Communications Hub rose before them, 40 stories of gleaming glass and steel masquerading as legitimate enterprise. Zara's heart thundered as they approached the underground parking garage, where a guard waved them through after checking their forged credentials. "Stay close," Luca said, helping her from the car with the practiced courtesy of a doting husband. His hand settled at the small of her back, warm and steady. The touch sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. They crossed the marble lobby like countless other couples starting their workday. Zara forced herself to lean into Luca's side, to smile up at him with manufactured affection. His answering smile appeared genuine enough to fool anyone watching, but she felt the tension in his muscles where their bodies connected. "Good morning," the receptionist beamed at them. "You must be the Bennetts. Welcome to Romano Logistics." Luca kept his arm around Zara as they collected visitor badges, his thumb stroking small circles against her hip. The casual intimacy felt dangerous, not because it might blow their cover, but because it felt far too natural. They rode the elevator to the 20th floor, where rows of cubicles housed the company's supposed shipping coordination department. Luca's intel suggested the trafficking data would be buried in the internal servers, accessible only through on-site workstations. "I'll create a distraction in 15 minutes, he whispered, brushing a kiss against her temple that made her pulse skip. "Be ready." Zara settled at an empty desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she initiated the exploit she'd prepared. Around her, employees typed and chatted, oblivious to her true purpose. She forced herself to breathe normally, to appear absorbed in routine tasks while her program probed the network's defenses, right on schedule, shouting, erupted from the break room. Zara heard Luca's voice rising above the commotion, drawing security personnel away from their posts. She took advantage of the chaos to dig deeper into the system, downloading everything she could find about shipping manifests and special cargo designations. The download was only halfway complete when heavy footsteps approached her cubicle. She minimized windows with trembling hands, but not fast enough. A security guard loomed over her, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on her screen. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the computer." Zara's heart stopped as the guard's radio crackled. "Sir, we have a situation. The man from the break room. It's Luca Romano in disguise." Time seemed to freeze. Then everything happened at once. The guard reached for his weapon. Zara kicked her chair back, ducking under his grab. She sprinted for the emergency stairs, hearing shouts and running feet behind her. 2 floors down, she burst into a mail sorting room, hoping to cut through to another stairwell. Instead, she found herself cornered by 2 more guards, their guns drawn. "Don't move!" one ordered. Before Zara could raise her hands, shadows detached from the walls. Luca appeared like a deadly specter, his movements liquid grace. The first guard crumpled without a sound, his weapon clattering away. The second managed half a shout before Luca's arm locked around his throat, cutting off both air and consciousness. It was over in seconds. Luca stood among the fallen men, chest heaving slightly, his eyes wild with protective fury. Zara stared at him, horror and fascination warring in her chest. She'd known what he was capable of, but seeing it, the lethal efficiency, the raw power barely contained beneath his controlled exterior, stole her breath. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing to her in 2 strides. She shook her head, unable to look away from his face. The glasses were gone, the carefully crafted disguise stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. Yet his hands were achingly gentle as they checked her for injuries, belying the violence they'd just delivered. "We need to move," he said, already pulling her toward the exit. "Did you get anything?" "Partial download." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Maybe 30% of the files." They fled through service corridors and down emergency stairs, emerging into the underground garage just as alarms began blaring throughout the building. Luca hotwired a different car, and they peeled out of the garage moments before steel shutters slammed down behind them. The drive back to the factory passed in tense silence. Adrenaline still coursed through Zara's veins, making her hyper-aware of every shift and breath from the man beside her. She couldn't stop seeing those moments in the mailroom. The fluid violence, the absolute certainty in his movements, the way he'd appeared the instant she needed him, as if some primal instinct had drawn him to her side. Inside, though, factory's relative safety, Luca immediately went to check her hands, which she'd scraped during their escape. She sat quietly as he cleaned and wrapped the abrasions, his touch impossibly careful for someone who'd incapacitated 3 armed men less than an hour ago. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said softly, securing the bandage. "The violence! I never wanted—" "Don't," she interrupted. "You saved my life." Rain began pattering against the factory's metal roof, a soothing counterpoint to their ragged breathing. Neither moved away when the bandaging was done. Luca's fingers lingered on her wrist, tracking her pulse. Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety. They dragged a mattress to the corner furthest from the windows, both too drained to maintain their usual careful distance. Zara lay down first, and after a moment's hesitation, Luca settled beside her. They faced each other in the growing darkness, barely inches apart. Zara studied his features, softened now by shadows and fatigue. The same hands that had dealt death with such precision now rested between them, relaxed and unthreatening. The contradiction should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself reaching across the space between them, her fingertips brushing his palm. His breath caught, but he didn't move, letting her explore this tentative connection on her own terms. Rain drummed steadily overhead as they lay in companionable silence, neither quite ready to sleep despite their exhaustion. The day's events replayed in Zara's mind, the fear, the violence, the desperate escape. Through it all, one truth emerged with startling clarity. When everything went wrong, her instinct hadn't been to run from Luca, but to run toward him. That realization should have sent her scrambling for distance. Instead, she remained where she was, letting the sound of his breathing mingle with the rainfall until she could no longer tell them apart. Gray light seeped through the factory's grimy windows as Zara hunched over her laptop, squinting at lines of encrypted data. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to make sense of the fragments they'd stolen. Beside her, Luca paced, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "These routes," she muttered, pointing to a series of coordinates. "They all converge here, but the location's coded." Luca leaned over her shoulder, his presence warm against her back. "That's the black site," he said quietly, "where they keep their most damning secrets." "Can we get in?" He straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's a fortress. The Don keeps it staffed with his most loyal soldiers, men who've proven their dedication through blood. They'd die before betraying him. But you know where it is." "Yes," his jaw tightened. "And it's suicide to even try." Zara spun in her chair to face him. "We need that evidence, Luca. Everything else is circumstantial, enough to raise questions, but not enough to bring down an empire." "You don't understand what you're asking." His voice held an edge of desperation. "These aren't normal guards. They're fanatics, true believers in my father's twisted vision." "And you're not?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Luca went still, his expression darkening. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You're his heir, his enforcer. For years you've done everything he asked without question." Zara stood, frustration overtaking her caution. "Why? Why stay loyal to someone who clearly sees you as nothing but a weapon?" "You think I had a choice?" His voice dropped dangerously low. "There's always a choice." "No." The word came out like broken glass. "Sometimes there isn't." He turned away, shoulders rigid with tension. Zara watched him struggle, sensing they'd reached some critical threshold. "What happened?" she asked softly. "What did he do to you?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I had a brother, Marco. He was—" Luca's hands clenched at his sides. "He was everything I wasn't. Kind, hopeful. He wanted out of this life, kept begging me to leave with him." Zara's heart squeezed. "Did you try?" 3 years ago, we had it all planned. New identities, plane tickets, a place to disappear." His breathing grew ragged. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Marco went missing. They found his body 2 days later in the river." "Oh God," Zara whispered. "The official story was a rival family." Luca's laugh held no humor. "But I knew. My father made sure I knew. He described exactly how it happened, every detail, while we sat having dinner. Said it was my fault for being weak, for thinking I could ever escape my responsibilities." He turned back to her, eyes haunted. "So no, Zara. Sometimes there is no choice. Sometimes the price of defiance is watching everyone you love die." The raw pain in his voice stripped away her last defenses. Without thinking, she crossed to him, laying a hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know." No one does. His voice roughened. I've never told anyone before. The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Zara struggled to reconcile this broken man with the deadly enforcer she'd seen yesterday. Both were real, she realized. Both were pieces of a whole she was only beginning to understand. Hours passed as they returned to the data, but something had shifted. The earlier hostility gave way to a careful companionship. They worked shoulder to shoulder, sharing observations in low voices. When Zara's eyes grew tired, Luca wordlessly passed her a bottle of water. When his hands clenched during particularly brutal revelations in the files, she touched his arm until the tension eased. Night crept in, painting the factory in shadows. They'd moved to sit against a wall, the laptop balanced between them. Zara found herself arguing about decryption methods, gesturing animatedly while Luca watched with something almost like amusement. You're wrong, she insisted. This pattern here, it's not just random noise. There's a message hidden in the spacing. If you say so. His voice held a warmth she'd never heard before. Don't patronize me, Romano. Wouldn't dream of it. She turned to glare at him and found his face much closer than expected. The teasing light in his eyes faded, replaced by something darker, more intense. Her breath caught. Neither moved away. The air between them grew thick with possibility. Zara's gaze dropped to his mouth, then snapped back up. His eyes had darkened further, tracking her every micro-expression. The laptop slid forgotten to the floor as Zara's exhaustion finally caught up with her. She felt herself listing sideways, unable to fight the pull of sleep. Her head came to rest against Luca's shoulder. She should move. She knew she should move. Instead, she let her eyes close, surrounded by his warmth and the faint scent of leather and gunpowder that clung to his clothes. Just before consciousness slipped away entirely, she felt him shift slightly, adjusting to better support her weight. His breathing deepened, steady and somehow reassuring. Luca remained motionless long after Zara's breathing evened out in sleep. He looked down at her face, peaceful now in rest, and allowed himself to acknowledge the dangerous longing that had been growing since that first moment in the church. He should wake her, send her to the mattress where they could maintain their careful distance. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, memorizing the weight of her against him, knowing this moment of peace couldn't last. The factory lay silent around them, holding its secrets in the darkness. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but something new had already begun to break over the horizon. The chandelier-lit lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled around them as Luca guided Zara through the crowd with a possessive hand at her lower back. Their wedding rings, replacements for the ones abandoned at the church, caught the light. Remember, Luca murmured against her ear. We're newlyweds, Mrs. Bennet. Zara fought a shiver at his proximity. I know my role. Their suite overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. One king bed dominated the space, a detail that made Zara's pulse quicken. They had 2 hours before meeting Romano's accountant in the hotel bar. We should rest, Luca said, but his eyes followed her as she paced. I can't rest. Zara ran her fingers through her hair. What if this is a trap? Then I'll handle it. His quiet certainty both terrified and thrilled her. Time crawled. When they finally descended to the bar, Zara wore a fitted black dress that made Luca's jaw clench. They claimed a corner booth, his arm draped across her shoulders as they scanned the room. A businessman 2 tables over kept staring. Zara's heart raced. Was he Romano's man? Without thinking, she turned to Luca and kissed him. The world stopped. His lips were impossibly soft against hers, still for 1 heartbeat before responding with careful restraint. His hand cupped her face with such gentleness it made her ache. When she parted her lips, his control wavered. The kiss deepened, became something real and dangerous and necessary. Zara pulled back, trembling. Luca's eyes were dark with longing as he brushed his thumb across her lower lip. The man stopped watching, she whispered. I don't care about the man. Luca's voice was rough. Before either could move, their contact stumbled into view. Blood stained his expensive suit, spreading from a wound in his side. He collapsed into their booth. They know, he gasped. The Don, he knows everything. You've been compromised. Who? Luca demanded. Who's feeding him information? The accountant's eyes went glassy. A mole. Watching you both. Since the beginning. His head lolled forward. Luca checked his pulse and cursed softly. He's gone. Shouts erupted from the lobby. Heavy footsteps approached. Come here, Luca ordered, pulling Zara into his arms. Stay close. We're leaving now. She pressed against him, heart pounding, as he guided them toward the service exit. His body was tense, coiled for violence, but his hold remained gentle. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "Trust me." And despite everything, despite the danger closing in and the revelation of betrayal, Zara did trust him. She shouldn't, but she did. Tires crunched over gravel as Luca's SUV wound through mountain backroads. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2 o'clock in the morning. Zara's head rested against the window, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Almost there," Luca murmured, taking a narrow turn that disappeared into dense forest. "This cabin. It's where Marco and I stayed when we tried to leave." The small structure emerged from the darkness, weathered wood and metal roof. Inside, dust covered everything except a single bed, pushed against the far wall. Neither spoke as they stumbled toward it, too drained to worry about propriety. Zara curled into Luca's chest, his arm wrapping protectively around her waist. Sleep claimed them instantly. Dawn filtered through dirty windows. Zara woke to find herself tangled with Luca, his face softened in sleep. When his eyes opened, the tension between them finally snapped. His first kiss was achingly gentle. "Sei bellissima," he whispered against her lips. "Beautiful." Their clothes fell away slowly, each touch reverent. Luca traced her skin like she was precious, fragile. "Tesoro mio," he breathed, making her shiver. His tenderness brought tears to her eyes. Later, wrapped in blankets, Zara pulled out her laptop while Luca made coffee. The accountant's files yielded coordinates, schedules, and a video that made her blood run cold. The footage showed Luca supervising girls being loaded into trucks. His face was hard, emotionless as he directed the operation. "What is this?" Her voice cracked. When he turned, the betrayal in her eyes stopped him cold. "Zara, you're part of it. The trafficking, this whole time." "That was filmed the week they had Marco." Pain etched his features. "The Don threatened to kill him slowly if I didn't comply. I tried to save those girls afterward, but—" Glass shattered as bullets tore through windows. Luca tackled Zara behind the bed as wood splintered around them. "Stay down!" he shouted, reaching for his gun. Romano soldiers crashed through the door. A rifle butt caught Luca's temple with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, blood streaming down his face. Rough hands seized Zara. She fought wildly, screaming as they dragged her toward a waiting van. The last thing she saw was Luca sprawled motionless in the grass, crimson staining the morning dew around him. "Luca!" Her cry echoed through the trees as the van doors slammed shut. Consciousness returned in waves of agony. Luca blinked against harsh sunlight, his head throbbing where the rifle had struck. Blood had dried on his temple, making his skin feel tight and crusty. The cabin stood silent, windows shattered, bullet holes decorating the walls. "Zara!" His voice came out raw. Only empty woods answered back. Rage and terror fueled him as he stumbled to his feet, the world tilting dangerously. Every step was a battle against vertigo, as he pushed through dense forest, following the tire tracks until they disappeared. After what felt like hours, the distant hum of traffic reached his ears. A highway emerged through the trees. Luca watched until a suitable vehicle appeared, an older model car, easy to hotwire. Within minutes, he was speeding toward the Romano estate, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Miles away, Zara huddled in darkness. Cold cement pressed against her back, the basement cell barely big enough to lie down. Water dripped somewhere, marking time in the blackness. Heavy footsteps approached, followed by the scrape of a key. Don Salvatore Romano's expensive cologne reached her before his face appeared. He studied her through the bars like an interesting insect. "Such a shame," he said, voice dripping false sympathy. "A talented journalist reduced to merchandise. But you should have known better than to dig into our business." "Luca will come for me," Zara spat. The Don's laughter echoed off stone walls. "My wayward son! Oh, he'll come crawling back, begging forgiveness like he always does. After we break him again, of course." He leaned closer. "The wedding was meant to be your execution, girl. A message to others who might follow your path. But now you'll disappear into our network. No trace, no body, no loose ends." Zara turned away, fighting tears. In her mind, she replayed Luca's gentle touches, his whispered Italian endearments, the way he'd looked at her like she was precious. He would come. He had to. The sun set as Luca approached the estate's towering gates. Security lights cast stark shadows across manicured grounds. Guards patrolled in practice patterns he knew by heart after years of enforcing them himself. He checked his weapons one final time, 2 handguns, extra magazines, combat knife. The Romano Empire had taken everything from him: Marco, his freedom, and now Zara. Tonight he would burn it all down. Rage coursed through his veins, cold and clarifying. He moved like a shadow toward the perimeter wall, years of training guiding each step. His father would learn what happened when you pushed a loyal dog too far. For Zara, he would tear his family's world apart with his bare hands. The estate's security lights cast long shadows as Luca moved through familiar gardens. Each step brought memories, playing hide-and-seek here with Marco, learning to shoot behind those hedges, enduring his father's lessons on that marble patio. Now those childhood grounds would become a battlefield. He took out the first 2 guards with silent efficiency, muscle memory guiding his hands. Their bodies dropped without a sound. The 3rd guard managed to hit the alarm before Luca's knife found him. Sirens split the night, and the estate erupted into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Luca dove behind a pillar, returning shots with mechanical precision. A bullet grazed his bicep, another buried itself in his ribs, but adrenaline dulled the pain. He fought his way through the grand foyer where society parties had once been held, past the library where he'd hidden from his father's rage, down toward the basement cells. Meanwhile, Zara lay on the cold cement floor of her cell, perfectly still. The young guard who'd been eyeing her nervously all evening approached the bars. "Hey, you okay in there?" He fumbled with his keycard when she didn't respond. The moment he stepped inside, Zara exploded into motion. She swept his legs, slammed his head against the wall, and grabbed his keycard. Her hands shook as she locked him in and ran. The corridor stretched endlessly before her, emergency lights casting everything in red shadows. She turned a corner and collided with a solid chest. Strong hands steadied her, hands she knew. "Luca! You came!" Zara sobbed, throwing herself into his arms. Luca crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair. "Always," he whispered hoarsely. "I will always come for you." His body shielded hers as more guards appeared, his gun never wavering despite his injuries. They fought their way upward together, Luca's bullets finding targets while Zara guided them through the maze-like corridors. In the main hall, they found Don Salvatore waiting with his personal security detail. "Ungrateful boy," the Don sneered. "Still trying to save what can't be saved?" Luca's response was a bullet to his father's knee. The Don's men opened fire, but Luca was already moving. Years of rage and pain fueled each shot, each strike. When he reached his father, the fight became intimate. Fists and knives and decades of hatred. "This is for Marco," Luca growled, driving his blade home. The Don's eyes widened in genuine surprise before going dark forever. Zara grabbed Luca's bloody hand. "We need to go!" They ran for the service tunnel, hidden behind the wine cellar, the one Luca and Marco had once used to sneak out as teenagers. Behind them, explosions rocked the estate as backup generators overloaded. The Romano Empire was falling, burning away in the night as they escaped into darkness. Morning light streamed through weathered curtains as Zara traced her fingers over fading bruises in the bathroom mirror. The coastal safehouse felt worlds away from the violence they'd escaped. All soft whites and worn wood, perfumed by salt air and healing herbs. Through the open window, she heard waves lapping against the shore, a steady rhythm that helped quiet her nightmares. Luca's cousin Marco owned the secluded cottage, repaying a debt from years ago when Luca had taken a bullet meant for him. Now it served as their sanctuary, hidden along a private stretch of coastline where the Romano name held no power. In the kitchen, Luca moved carefully, favoring his injured side as he prepared coffee. The gunshot wounds were healing clean, but pain still tightened his features when he thought she wasn't looking. Zara wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek between his shoulder blades. "You should be resting," she murmured. "So should you." He turned, pulling her closer, his touch gentle over her healing injuries. Days flowed together in peaceful routine, mornings spent writing her manuscript, carefully documenting the trafficking operation while protecting Luca's involvement. Afternoons watching him coordinate with trusted contacts, methodically dismantling what remained of his father's empire through strategic information leaks. Their nights were soft and intimate, cooking simple meals together, walking the empty beach as sunset painted the waves gold, falling asleep tangled in each other's arms without fear of interruption. Zara's laptop filled with pages of damning evidence, but Luca's name never appeared. She couldn't risk him facing charges for crimes he'd been forced to commit. He had suffered enough for his father's sins. "The FBI raided another warehouse today," Luca told her one evening, setting his phone aside. Anonymous tip led them straight to the documentation. That's the third trafficking hub shut down this week. Zara smiled, settling beside him on their worn couch. "How many more?" 2, maybe 3. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Soon there will be nothing left of my father's legacy except ashes. The sunset walk became their daily ritual, bare feet in cool sand, hands linked, sharing comfortable silence as they watched seabirds wheel overhead. Tonight, however, Lucas seemed distracted, tense in a way she hadn't seen since their escape. Near their favorite, driftwood log, he stopped suddenly. Zara turned to him, concerned, but her words died as he slowly lowered himself to one knee. Her heart stuttered, remembering their first meeting, him kneeling in that gaudy church, desperately trying to save her life. This time was different. His eyes held nothing but love as he produced a simple silver ring, its single diamond catching the dying light. Months ago, I knelt before you out of necessity, he said softly. Today I kneel because my heart gives me no choice. You made me brave enough to break free. You showed me I deserved more than survival. His voice roughened with emotion. This is the only marriage I have ever wanted. You are the first choice I have ever made purely for myself. Tears blurred Zara's vision as she whispered, Yes. Lucas slipped the ring onto her trembling finger before rising to kiss her deeply, pouring years of loneliness and pain into the gentle press of his lips. They stood embracing as stars began appearing above the darkening water. Later, they sat curled together in the window seat of their bedroom, watching moonlight dance across the waves. Zara's head rested on Luca's chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. The future stretched before them like the endless horizon, bright with possibility, unmarked by shadows. What do you want to do first? She asked, playing with his fingers entwined with hers. Everything, he murmured into her hair. Anything, as long as it's with you. They had emerged from fire and darkness to build something beautiful, a love forged in loyalty, tempered by sacrifice, and finally free to grow in the light. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.